Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're glad you've decided to join us this week too. This is a show where we visit topical events and meet interesting people, and we've got another good show lined up this week.
We do. It's really timely, I think, because of the recent elections. We're going to be talking about presidential signing statements, and we will be talking to two fellows that know a lot about it. They're both professors of law at Oklahoma City University, and they're going to tell us what is a presidential signing statement. What does it mean? What effect does it have? And what is the controversy, if any, about them? And I think with the national elections turning out as they have, with Democrats in control of both houses of Congress, and the president being from another party, I think we'll maybe see a little closer scrutiny on signing statements, and you'll be ahead of the game. You'll know what they're talking about when that happens.
It's all coming up today on The Verdict, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
At Chesapeake Energy, here's a few of our favorite Hornets. Alexis likes reading. Sam enjoys history. Alec loves math. Chesapeake is proud to support both the Oklahoma City NBA Hornets and the Young Hornets at Horace Mann Elementary, where over 150 Chesapeake employees mentor to children each week. The students gain a lot from the experience, but not as much as we do. Chesapeake Energy, committed to building a better Oklahoma.
Hi, honey. You've got to check this out.
What? What are we listening to?
I had digital phone service installed today.
It sounds just like before.
I know, but it's going to save us a ton of money.
With Cox Digital Telephone, you'll save big every month. Keep your same phone number and get your favorite calling features. Just pay less.
That does sound good.
You should hear the upstairs phone.
Not sure where you're headed? NATS can help you find your way. It's the National Athletic Testing System. We call it NATS. You'll call it your launching pad to success. NATS will give you a standardized evaluation that will help you measure your performance and give that information to college coaches so they can accurately evaluate your potential. NATS also helps with academic support. Join with the Oklahoma High School Football Coaches Association and head for success at www.nats.us.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guests.
We're very pleased today to have two acknowledged experts on signing statements with us, both their colleagues at Oklahoma City University. On my left is Mark Blitz, an assistant professor of law at Oklahoma City University. Mark did his undergraduate work at Harvard, did his law and his PhD work at the University of Chicago. He was in private practice in D.C. for a number of years before coming to teach at Oklahoma City University. Dean Larry Hellman stole him from the private practice, and we're glad he did. Mark, welcome to The Verdict. Thanks for joining us. Glad you're here. Across the table is Andy Spiropoulos. Andy has been at OCU for about 15 years. He's the director of the Center for Study of State Constitutional Law and Government, as well as teaching constitutional law. He did his undergraduate work at Carleton College, did his MA and JD work at, once again, University of Chicago. You guys are colleagues more ways than one, I see. Was also engaged in the private practice of law, was a law clerk for a judge before starting to teach. And he writes and teaches in constitutional law and other areas as well. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you for
having me.
Glad
to have you.
Happy to be here.
Mark, I suspect many members of our audience are saying a presidential signing statement, never heard of it. For those who are completely unaware of the term, explain what a presidential signing statement is.
Sure. It's a statement that a president issues an official pronouncement, usually in writing, at the same time that the president signs a bill into law, a bill that's been passed by both houses of Congress. And the president will make a statement, usually providing the president's own interpretation of what specific aspects of that law means, sometimes going beyond that and stating that there are other provisions of law that weren't passed that the president would have liked Congress to pass. And sometimes, and most controversially, raising what the president views as constitutional difficulties with the law, and then giving notice, really, that as a result of those constitutional difficulties, the president will either refrain from enforcing that part of the law, even though he's signing it into law, or more commonly, will interpret the law in such a way that the constitutional difficulties don't arise. So that would be a situation where there's some ambiguity. There are various ways that the language that Congress has put in the act can be interpreted in multiple ways, and the president is saying, I'm going to choose the interpretation that I view as consistent with the Constitution and not other interpretations, even if those other interpretations might be preferable to many members of Congress.
So there are, my interpretation is that if we didn't have presidential signing statements, it would create chaos in certain situations.
Not necessarily. That's not the only way that the president can communicate his or her views about how he believes the law should be interpreted. That's not the only way that the president can chastise Congress for not passing certain things the president would like to have passed. The president can always do that just in a press conference. The president can also do that in other sorts of formal statements. The president, for example, can issue an executive order. That's an order that the president issues to administrative agencies operating under him, directing them, in some cases, to adopt a certain interpretation of the law or to enforce the law in a certain way. So it's not clear that without signing statements, the president wouldn't be able to do many of the same things he does in signing statements. Now, one possible advantage of signing statements is you get that interpretation from the very beginning. As soon as the law becomes a law, as soon as it receives the president's signature, the president is announcing what problems he views as being in the law, and what most seriously, what constitutional difficulties he's finding in the law.
Andy, let me change, well, keep on the same subject, but let's look backwards. We learned in law school that Congress passed the law and the president signed it, but he could either choose to sign it or not, but if he did, it was a law, and he was charged to follow it. What's a historical basis, as you understand it, for presidential signing statements?
Well, as you would expect, the issue is a lot more complicated than what we seem to teach in law school, because think of a couple of different examples. If Congress passed a law that was clearly unconstitutional, that everybody who fairly looked at this law would see it as being unconstitutional, would you really want the president to enforce that law? Would you really want the president to round up innocent citizens and put them away in a concentration camp if that's what Congress had passed? And what if it was in a bill that had many other provisions that were needed to fight a war, and it was an emergency? Should the president just veto the whole bill and therefore put the war in jeopardy? No, throughout our entire history, presidents have reserved the option to sign the bill and not enforce a provision that's unconstitutional. It's an unusual situation in that one hopes that Congress doesn't pass laws that are unconstitutional very often. But that's something that presidents have always, really, since the very beginning. Andrew Jackson, for example, Thomas Jefferson both claimed the ability not to enforce laws that they thought were unconstitutional.
So from the very beginning. Not recent.
Right, so but we have to separate that from the phenomenon of signing statements, because that's just one use that presidents make of signing statements, but that's the most controversial one. When it comes to the signing statement itself has been used, one scholar has dated it back to James Monroe, so the early 19th century. And it really just is an unproblematic use, not even presidential constitutional authority, really, of the president's ability just to speak as a political actor. When the president signs a bill, he can pretty much say anything he wants. If he wants to put it in writing and say this is the reason that I decided to sign this bill, or I have other concerns. I mean, for example, the most common thing you see in presidential signing statements is a president's political position. This bill is nice, I would have preferred to see some other things, or taking credit for this bill. And so I think the controversy of presidential signing statements is really about something else. It's really about particular claims of presidential power rather than the vehicle of the signing statement itself.
The constitutional basis, is there any constitutional basis for the president?
There isn't. I mean, the specific constitutional provisions at issue. What the Constitution says is that you can either sign a bill or you can veto it, and if you veto the bill, you actually have to send a message explaining why you vetoed it. It doesn't tell you what you need to do when you sign a bill, but it also tells you, it doesn't tell you that you can't. And it's one of those things in which, how can you possibly muzzle the president and when he decides to sign a bill from saying something about what he thinks the bill ought to mean or what it does mean? And as Mark said, it's actually helpful information as to what the president is going to do. Again, the controversy isn't so much, think about it this way, it isn't about the car. This is the car. It's about where we're going. It's about the use that at least President Bush is making of this vehicle.
Yeah.
That I think that's at issue.
We're just about out of time in this segment, but when most bills are signed, are they effective immediately? Are they enforced immediately, or is it a month or two lapse?
It depends on the bill. The bill will usually state a date about when it's effective. In Oklahoma, for example, all bills are effective on a certain date unless there's an emergency clause which moves it a little earlier. Congress has a little more discretion in determining when a bill is effective. They can make it retroactive or prospective. So that's part of usually the bill's process.
We're discussing presidential signing statements, and we'll be right back. You're watching The Verdict.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Shining is taking responsibility. At Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, we know managing your health care can be overwhelming, and it's our job to help you meet the challenge. By guiding, supporting, and showing the way, we encourage you to gain control. Because we believe the best tool we can give you is the confidence to take charge. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, shining through.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods. We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites. We called the OERB and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. It didn't cost us a thing. Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Cox Communications and the Oklahoma Historical Society present the first in a new series of programs created especially for Oklahoma Centennial.
You cannot understand Oklahoma history without understanding the history of American Indians.
They decided to preserve Sequoia's last home. His home has never been moved. It's on the exact spot he built it in 1829.
Voices of Oklahoma, the American Indian Experience. See it all this month on the Cox Channel.
You need this one to get satellite HD. This one's your DVR. This one's for local channels. This one's...
What are we supposed to do with all this stuff?
Got you covered. Oh, by the way, that old satellite stuff makes a great end table.
That doesn't look so bad, right, honey?
Don't live in satellite denial. Get the latest entertainment without the hassles from Cox, your friend in the digital age.
And we are back on The Verdict, discussing presidential signing statements. Kent, where to now?
I'd like to ask Mark to comment on what use President Bush has made of signing statements during his 6-year tenure so far.
Well, it's not been markedly different from the use that the past 4 presidents have made of signing statements. He uses them for the kinds of things that I was talking about earlier. He uses them just to make statements of presidential policy. He uses them to give a particular interpretation of the bill. What he's done much, much more than other presidents is the most controversial use of signing statements, which is raise what he sees as constitutional difficulties with statutory provisions. So for example, according to a recent report by the Congressional Research Service, 86% of his signing statements have contained constitutional objections. That compares to 27% of President Clinton's signing statements. So that's one reason why many people, including the American Bar Association, have raised worries about his use of signing statements. It's not so much that he's doing something radically new that no one else has done before. It's the amount that he's doing it, the number of constitutional challenges he's raising. Another way in which he's using signing statements in a new way is when he makes a constitutional objection, it tends to be to multiple provisions of a statute. So by one count, actually by a number of counts, he's objected to over 700 different statutory provisions, which is many more than his predecessors have done.
Let me ask you both a question, answered however you like. When he makes this objection in a signing statement that says, I think paragraph 1 is unconstitutional, objectionable, unconstitutional, does he at the same time make a directive to the Department of Justice saying, don't enforce paragraph 1 because I think it's unconstitutional?
And what he usually does, actually, he doesn't usually come straight out and say, I think this is unconstitutional. What he says is that this raises constitutional questions, this may impinge on my power, and therefore I will construe this statute, I will interpret this statute as being constitutional. So he'll follow it as long as it's constitutional. For example, in a lot of provisions, Congress has said you must report by this date with a plan to do X, or you must tell us this. And the president will say, well, you can't tell me what to do, so I'm going to treat this as being advisory.
Does every bill have a signing statement?
No.
Okay.
Some do, some
does
don't.
President Bush seem to use more signing statements than most presidents?
He actually, in terms of recent presidents, has issued fewer presidential signing statements. He tends to not issue the rhetorical or political signing statements as much as the other presidents. President Clinton, for example, had over 300. President Bush has even gotten up to 150 yet, at least as the date the two were compared. What President Bush, as Mark said, does a lot more than President Clinton does is the constitutional challenges in his presidential signing statements. But interestingly enough, not as many as Bush 1 did. His father actually had more per year than he did. So it's not true that this President Bush has been unprecedented. Now, what is different that this president has done is, as Mark explained, is the multiple sections. He's just, in one signing statement, he'll go over several parts of the bill. And so therefore he's been much more systematic in his constitutional challenges, and that's because of his theory of the presidency, which is really what what the controversy is about. The signing statement is just a stalking horse for people to argue about Bush's theory of the presidency.
Well, is the signing statement an appropriate use, as you view it, to set forth the view of the presidency?
Absolutely. As Mark explained earlier, if he didn't use a signing statement, he has a whole bunch of other tools to do exactly the same thing: executive orders, informal communications. Look, here's what the argument's about. Here's what the ABA is upset about, but they won't come out and say it.
Let's. I'm interrupting you, and I apologize for that.
Please do.
But both of you referred to the ABA. Just in 15 seconds, tell us what the ABA is doing, American Bar Association.
Sure.
Is doing.
The American Bar Association appointed a special task force. The president was concerned about signing statements, so he appointed a special task force, and they've issued a report on presidential signing statements. Very critical.
President of the ABA.
Correct. Okay. And it's very critical of President Bush's signing statements, and the House of Delegates ended up approving a series of resolutions criticizing the president and asking for change. Although they went out of their way to say they weren't criticizing the president, they're just concerned about this practice, but they're really criticizing the president. Well, let me tell you what I think, the extent to which people are afraid, what they're afraid about, is that the reason why the president does all these constitutional objections is that he believes in something called the Unitary Executive. And put it very quickly, what the Unitary Executive theory says is that there is this core of executive power that the president has that Congress can't control, that belongs to the president himself. And part of this power is the president, all this power is lodged in the president personally, and he has to have the power to control the entire executive branch, to tell all of his subordinates what to do, to do his duties the way he sees fit, without Congress ordering him how he can use this power. Therefore, every time Congress tries to do something that tells him how to use troops in Colombia, for example, should they use it for drug interdiction, you need to make this report. He says, no, you can't tell me what to do with my own power. Therefore, I might. He often says in these signing statements, I'm going to do it anyway as a matter of comedy. I'll be nice to you. I want to get along. But you can't tell me what to do. So I'm pointing out the fact that you can't give me this order. And that's what's controversial, is this theory of the presidency.
Go ahead, Mark.
The other thing that makes this controversial is the war on terrorism. And the debate about this, I think, is very closely related to the debate over signing statements. A lot of the signing statements that people have been most worried about have been signing statements that came on laws relating to the war on terrorism. So, for example, the
torture.
The Detainee Treatment Act had limitations on the way that the executive could carry out interrogations. And so, in his signing statement, President Bush said, along the model that Andy laid out earlier, that I'll construe this in a way that's consistent with my power as Commander-in-Chief and my duty to protect the American people. Meaning that, or at least implying that when there's a conflict between your limitations and my duty to protect the public, my duty to protect the public might override those limitations on interrogation.
And what's interesting is that even though the numbers aren't the same, President Clinton made exactly the same kind of objections when dealing with the same kind of laws. When Republican Congress attempted to control how U.S. troops would work with UN troops. They passed a bill. President Clinton issued the very same kind of presidential signing statement. Again, didn't do it as often. I think in large part, as Mark explained, we live in different times.
Have these been constitutionally tested in court?
Well, I mean, you're never going to actually, in my view at least, test the presidential signing statement in court because I think it's, frankly, just not a problem for the president to do it in of itself. What we're going to test in court is the president's interpretation of the Constitution. Is he right about what he's saying in these signing statements? And that's and it's dicey. I mean, there are a lot of instances in which President Bush has made these claims where I'm not sure that current Supreme Court president supports him on the objections that he's making, although it's vague enough so that there might be at least a plausible argument in his favor.
I think one concern also is when you have 700 plus statutory provisions challenged, it's not clear to me that that means that President Bush is abusing signing statements. It may be a sign that something is going wrong, in that you can't have all of those 700 provisions tested by the Supreme Court in any period of time that one would consider reasonable. It's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So what this may signal is that there are serious constitutional controversies, serious disagreements between Congress and the President over what laws can be enforced consistent with the Constitution.
I think we're going to have to make that the final word. Mark, Andy, thanks for coming on this fascinating show.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much. We just need more time for this.
And Kent and I'll be back with the final word right after this.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you. Looks like somebody doesn't want you to know the facts about Cox Digital Telephone. Maybe it's because over 1.5 million customers are saving big, and you can too. Plus, you'll save even more on all your Cox services when you bundle today.
Oh, here's that new phone service I've been hearing about.
So while the phone company may not like competition,
Nice doggy.
you're gonna love it.
Nice doggy.
One in 4 women will be a victim of domestic or sexual violence in their lifetime.
That's too many.
That's why we want you to know that if you or someone you know is suffering at the hands of an abuser, there is help. Call the Oklahoma Safe Line at 1-800-522-SAFE for access to state and local resources that can truly make a difference. Call anonymously, call toll-free, call today, because domestic violence is not a game. It's life or death.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers wrapping up a show on presidential signing statements, and I know I learned a lot. I hope our viewers did too.
Well, I certainly did as well, and I think it's kind of interesting that all these signing statements about which there is controversy comes when legislation from a Republican-controlled House and Senate reaches the president's desk. What if it was heavy then? What's it going to be after the January of this year when the houses are controlled by the opposing party? I suspect they're going to be even more signing statements.
Absolutely. Have an upcoming show you want to talk about?
Glenn Coffey.
Glenn Coffey.
Senator, Honorable Glenn Coffey is going to come on and talk to us about the upcoming legislative session beginning in January. He's got a lot of interesting information for us.
TheVerdict.tv is the website where you can go and get more information on this show. We hope you'll go to that website and tell us what you'd like to see on a future edition of The Verdict. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time.
The preceding program was produced by the Production Services Group at Cox Communications, exclusively for the Cox Channel.